Hey dudes, it's Lerald, and the PoE 2 patch 0.2.0 reveal happened earlier today. The livestream reveal and the subsequent Q&A were over 2.5 hours long, so there's a lot to unpack. There are also a ton more changes happening to the game that didn't even make the stream. The Q&A was also very quiet for the first 20 minutes or so, which did make it a bit hard to hear what was being said. I had to listen back to it a couple of times to kind of get all of the information together. I wound up being around a 50% hit rate on my pre-patch bingo board, which I don't feel that bad about. So starting off, this patch is focused on the end game. Some people might be upset that there wasn't a new act added to the campaign, or more classes other than just the Huntress, but I think this is actually the right call, especially having taken a couple of hours to really think about it now. Getting the end game into a good state so that we have something to do with our characters once we get there is a lot more important than adding a bunch of new classes to play in the campaign and enjoy, and then get to endgame and log out. And we are getting the Huntress, as we expected. Having Druid as an alternative would have been cool, but I can wait. If I got to choose, I would also fix the endgame before adding more than just the one class. And fix the endgame is exactly what they're doing. Based on the Q&A, we need to prepare for a massive number of changes. They threw around the number 10,000. I think that's hypothetical, but still, that basically they have said, if you like something overpowered, it probably won't be. If you like something underpowered, it probably won't be. If you hate something overpowered, it probably won't be. They specifically name-checked Spark, Grim Feast, and Hand of Wisdom in Action as overperformers, and Pathfinder crossbows and maces as underperformers. They also mentioned heralds and said that they're no longer going to be able to propagate status effects off of each other. No real big surprise there. So covering every single thing that was said would take, 2.5 hours, and we don't even have notes for a complete deep dive yet anyways, so I want to spend the rest of this video really focusing in on the most important aspects of the reveal. Alright, number one, most important thing, the in-game gameplay loop is significantly enhanced. There is way more stuff on the Atlas to do. Corruption on the Atlas has been redesigned, and this is going to be kind of the main driving force throughout progressing around the Atlas. It'll actually give us a justification for it being a big civilization-looking Atlas, right? There is corruption, and then in the middle of the corruption, there's a Nexus map. You clear through maps to get to that Nexus, then you clear the Nexus, and that will cleanse all of the remaining maps in the area. This is the new in-game quest loop as well, rather than clearing 10 maps of each tier. That was very boring and bare bones. This will actually give you your in-game Atlas passive points, which is great, and you get 10 more of them than we did in the initial patch, so it'll be 40. We don't really know what's in that tree yet, although I cannot wait to break it down once we do. And once you've cleared the Nexus, you convert all of the corrupted maps that were in the area into cleansed maps. So cleansed maps will contain cleansed monsters, and cleansed monsters don't drop equipment. I think that's just some of the monsters in the maps. That was a little unclear. But instead, they drop more currency and more waystones. And specifically, they drop fracturing orbs. And that represents another thing that I'll kind of get to in a bit more detail later on. But crafting is more of a thing in this patch. It's still more RNG than it is in PoE 1, but that's kind of to be expected. Another big change that's happening with mapping is that the number of portals will be based on map mods, and so it looked initially like it was just going to be 6 portals, which would have been pretty dank. Instead, it's going to be 6 portals in 1 mod maps and 1 portal in 6 mod maps, and some people felt very baited by this, and I mean, I think sure, but they're not really thinking it through all the way. Basically, the way I see this is that blindly running 6 mod maps is not the way to go now for high-level juicing. Instead, what you want to do is you want to run 4 mod maps, or maybe 5 mod maps if you're worried about dying at all, and that would be 3 prefixes and then either 1 or 2 suffixes. And so Omens of Sinistral Alchemy, these give you 3 prefixes and 1 suffix if you alchemy a waystone. These are going to be huge. And this is going to make Ritual more valuable. Ritual is already being buffed as well, so this is just going to be something that's really, really valuable to have. It'll make it very easy to get 3 prefixes and 1 suffix so that you're getting max rewards and still having 2 or 3 portals in every map. Now, there was also some initial concern that currently the way that they have it working is that they're actually portals, so if you fill up your inventory, you can't leave and go back in. You can't leave and trade with people. Obviously that sucks. They even acknowledged that in the Q&A, so it's probably going to be more like there are still 6 portals, but it's just you can re-enter after dying. I would imagine that'll be in with the patch. Boy, I sure hope it is. If it is something that comes in 0.2.1, that would be disappointing if it takes them that long, but that is high on their priority list. So Waystone Sustain is obviously a concern here, especially if you are kind of gaming the amount of mods that you have on your maps and you're only running like 4 or 5 mod maps. You might not be able to sustain Waystones, right? Well, that's another thing that they're fixing here. You will no longer be able to drop lower tier maps in your maps, and so this really helps with minimizing the amount of clutter that you pick up. Because if you're able to do a tier 5 map, right, you probably don't need tier 1 Waystones anymore. And so they're just going to make it so that you get a lot more maps of the tier that you're at and of higher tier maps as well. And you also have a guaranteed drop from the final rare. So as long as you're able to successfully clear the maps that you're running, you will never fall back down in tier. You will always be able to sustain, even if your RNG is god awful. I love that. It also means less clutter, easier sustain is good. It's just really, really, really good. Of course, they didn't stop there. They've also made huge changes to towers and tablets. So towers were a huge source of like complaints from people in the community, including myself. I'm not a huge fan. And so they've cut the number of towers down by like 66%. They're basically 1/3 as many towers, but they are stronger and they hit a larger radius. You can actually put 3 tablets at a time into towers, and the effect of tablets is increased. And if you do higher tier maps, like tier 15 maps in the tower, then the amount of maps affected by your tablets will be up to doubled. So you can hit like 20 plus maps with a single tablet. That's pretty good. Towers are also able to have bosses now, which is interesting. You know, I don't know that they're going to have any uniques in there, but maybe, like, there's definitely a possibility that there'll be some sort of tower boss uniques, which is pretty cool. All right, next up is crafting buffs, and this is a big one. So Expedition has gotten the big improvement that I had hoped it would. It's gotten recombination. So initially this was shown off in the reveal video to just work like the Recombinator from PoE 1, where you take a bow and another bow and you put them into the Recombinator and you press the button and it slams their mods together. However, during the Q&A, they said that this is actually going through some changes, and you'll be able to select the mods that you're trying to combine from each of the 2 items, which has a chance to fail depending on how many mods that you've chosen, and if it fails, it'll destroy both items. This is a pretty interesting change to recombination. You can like kind of play it safe or go big. This is obviously way better than Expedition was. And the thing is that they also didn't take away the crafting mechanic that's associated with Expedition. So if you're playing SSF or you really just want to make a Expedition item, you can. But otherwise, you know, I think there's a very big value for all of the Expedition currencies now, because you can use them to recombinate weapons or rings or body armors or whatever. And that is really, really interesting stuff. As I mentioned before, they've also buffed Ritual, and the way that they're doing that is by making omens always appear in the Ritual window. There will always be at least one omen in every Ritual, which is good. You know, they may not necessarily be good ones, but still that's a pretty big buff. And then they also, on top of that, have made omens 2.5 times more common. This does indicate to me that there are going to be more omens for crafting. It's going to be not necessarily deterministic, not even close to deterministic, but a lot easier to use crafting omens, or at least to farm them. You know, if you're not comfortable with the RNG aspect of crafting items, you can farm them and sell them to people who are, and then just buy the gear that they've crafted after they've spent their time in their hideout playing around. Now, as for the fractured orbs that come from the cleanse maps, Mark was point blank asked about their rarity in the Q&A, and his exact quote was, "They drop from the monsters." Pretty typical GGG response. It seemed like, based off of his indication though, was like he felt like he was getting about 1 in every area. So that would indicate a much higher drop rate on these than you get from Harbingers and PoE 1, which means that it might actually be more realistically doable to use fractured orbs on decent pieces of gear, and then try and recombine those together with Expedition and actually make some pretty, like, broken pieces of gear. They also showed off some special runes. They have a lot more runes, and they've said more or less that they consider this, at least for now, to be the replacement of the crafting bench, which I kind of figured, but you know, it's interesting to actually hear them at least like say it out loud. And as you can see here, right, there are tiers to runes. Runes are also going to have a slot in the currency tab, which is great, so it'll be easier to manage them. But you can see, like, there's a lot more interesting stuff going on with just some of these runes, and I think Jonathan said specifically it was a very bare bones system that they really just kind of threw together at the last minute. There are also these talismans that I believe are what you get from the wisps, and these can also be used similarly to runes, and you can see some pretty interesting bonuses in here as well. Guaranteed rage, corrupted blood immunity, crit bonus damage reduction. You know, another currency to farm is always a good thing. I think that's probably been the biggest issue I had with the initial state of PoE 1, or PoE 2 rather, was the lack of like a bunch of different currencies to farm because essences weren't very valuable, expedition currency wasn't very valuable, ritual was RNG, and that pretty much just left delirium and breach. Well, now you have talismans, and you have fractured orbs, and you have expedition currency being valuable, so I think that really opens up a lot more. Alright, so the next thing obviously is the Huntress. She is the class that they're using to introduce spears into the game, and they look pretty cool. They're kind of a hybrid of a melee and ranged weapon. They're a long-range melee weapon like the staff from the monk, but then you're also able to throw them around. And there's also kind of an emphasis on both bleed and elemental damage. Now, I don't think you're going to be using both of those together, but obviously that means there's a lot of freedom in the way that you can build the character, whether you want to go pure physical or like pure elemental or whatever. There's also a lot of emphasis on blind as a mechanic as well, which I'm kind of into. I think that could be pretty cool to build around blinding enemies and evasion, and also bucklers, which are the new type of shield that they're giving specifically to Huntresses, although, you know, I mean, it's a piece of gear in Path of Exile, any class can use it. So they have this parry mechanic that's very similar to block. It'll prevent all damage just like block does, and has like a stagger bar that builds up as you block more. But unlike block, it debuffs enemies, basically stunning them slightly, kind of like a parry in Dark Souls, right? I think that's where they got that core concept. One big difference from the way that block works, though, is that it benefits from evasion. So if you have parry up and evasion would have avoided the hit, instead of not parrying and stunning the enemy, it will prevent the stagger buildup. So you can potentially, with enough gear, this is something they said in the Q&A specifically, if you have enough evasion, if you have enough block chance, if you have enough parry, whatever, you might be able to just hold down parry forever and just never get hit by enemies, which is pretty awesome. Now, there are also some skills that they're trying to make usable to like combo together, so you can parry something so that it slightly stuns it and then do like a disengage and cause that to do a big AoE damage combo. I think that's going to be pretty fun to play around with. Huntresses are also being added with beast taming as a skill. That's going to be one of the spear skills. Basically, you get to become Einhar. You're able to like capture beasts and make them fight for you. And I think it's going to kind of work like a sort of a version of Raised Spectre, but instead of being like necromantic, it's a bit more huntressy, you know. Also, they have said that these will not be tradable, and thank God for that, because if they were tradable, then I feel like every class would need to be able to capture beasts and then sell them on TFT or whatever, and so better that that just not even exist in the first place. So they're launching the Huntress with 2 Ascendancy classes, and I want to touch on the Amazon first. We'll just go alphabetically here, right? And so this one seems a little bit more straightforward. I think this is going to wind up being the stronger of the two, although we'll see. I think the Ritualist has some very, very strong stuff in it. Just to kind of look at this, I don't really know what Infused Weapon does exactly. We don't have a lot of information on that, but it does something when you consume charges and gives you some sort of damage bonus. That seems pretty interesting, and then there's a bit of synergy with that with Infused Avatar. So this could be good if this is tuned to be good. It could be bad. A lot of the skills in 0.1.0 that were added to classes as kind of a baseline wound up not being that great, so this might not be that great either. Over on the right-hand side, you have 3 different defensive nodes here. Mystic Harvest giving you life leech based off your Ellie damage. It's okay, it does seem like they're doubling down on the idea of only being able to leech from physical, which I'm not thrilled about, and I don't know how great this really is going to wind up being, but there's something there. I think Azmiri Brew is a lot more interesting. Life Flasks, also recovering mana. Mana Flasks, recovering life. I think that's really interesting. So I think that one I think does a lot more for me. It'll have some like good synergy with a lot of the weird but very powerful flask nodes that are around the tree where the Ranger and Huntress start out, so that could be good. And then Stalking Panther makes it so that your evasion rating from like 3 of your pieces of gear is doubled, but then your body armor is halved, and body armor is kind of the main one, so this one's a pretty big downside if you're going pure evasion. I don't really know how good this actually would wind up being. It's possible this could be really good, but I have some concerns about it, so yeah, I don't know. Now, the real like selling point on this tree, I think, comes in these 2 middle branches. So the middle and lower branch really are what's super interesting here. Predatory Instinct, they showed this off in the trailer. This basically just puts like these sort of like extra red patches onto rare and unique enemy health bars, and when you DPS their health bar down to the point where that's like the current part that you're DPSing, that counts as an open weakness, and so you do 50% more damage, which is pretty huge. I couldn't tell if it like would stop as soon as the damage hit that end point, or if you could like get it almost to the end and then hit it with a huge hit, if that would like carry over throughout that whole hit. Couldn't really tell. Don't know that it really matters, but obviously like this is a pretty big damage increase. It seemed to fill up like multiple spots in the health bar, so this seems like it might be 20 or 25% more damage against rares and uniques overall, which is pretty big. Getting more skill speed, more move speed is okay. It's not as good as like 20 or 25% more damage, obviously, but it's all right. I think that the first point here is actually quite a lot stronger than the second, which is interesting, maybe not ideal. Then the lower branch, I think, is the one that really like was screaming to me that it's just incredibly good. So your chance to hit can go over 100%, and then any chance to hit that's over 100% is added as crit chance. That's pretty amazing. And then the point after it is so good. Attacks using your weapons have added physical damage equal to 25% of the accuracy rating on the weapon. So both of these scream accuracy stacker, dex stacker. You're going to stack dex and accuracy to the absolute rafters, take every accuracy node you can on the entire anywhere on the tree, and just get massive added flat fizz and massive amounts of crit chance. I think this is going to be insane damage scaling, and then you can pair that with some of the defensive stuff like Esmeri Brew or Mystic Harvest or, I don't know, Stalking Panther or whatever, and maybe like the points in Predatory Instinct. I think that's pretty much instant offense for any setup as an Amazon. Now, the Ritualist is, I think, a little bit more hard to kind of make work in my mind. So you have Corrupted Life Force. This basically makes it so that, like, as you're kind of running around, you're putting blood boils on enemies, and then when they die, they'll spread corrupted blood to other nearby enemies that are still alive. It's a bit weird. There seems like a bit of a kind of a ramp up. I don't really love that, but it could wind up being very good. I don't know. Ritual Sacrifice, this As the Whispers Ask, basically gives you the ability to trigger, or not trigger, actually like hard cast a Headhunter buff. When you kill rares, you can use Ritual Sacrifice on them and you'll Headhunter steal their bonuses. Now, they said in the trailer, the reveal for this, that it would only steal 1 modifier. However, they actually stole all 4. And it lasts for like 26 seconds. Then As the Whispers Demand steals 1 mod. So, I'm not exactly sure who to believe, but you could use As the Whispers Demand on yourself and just get a random modifier. So could be good, could be bad. I don't know. This seems like a lot of investment for something that's maybe good and maybe not. Then this middle branch here with Intricate Sigils and Mindful Actors, this is charm related stuff. I don't really think this is much of anything at all. And Wildwood Persistence, getting increased life recovery rate per missing life. You would have to get a lot of investment into other like flat life recovery for this to be really good. It's a good concept, but it doesn't really synergize with where the Huntress is in the tree. So I'm not a huge fan of this. I think if this were on like some sort of warrior or marauder ascendancy, I think this could be pretty good, but as it is, not really that great. But then you have the bottom branch of the Ritualist, which is absolutely crazy. So obviously you see 3 small downsides here in this branch here, and I think reduced elemental resistances is going to be the easiest one to overcome at higher gear levels. Probably reduced max mana, or maybe the reduced spirit for the campaign would be the one you'd want to go with. But then you get an extra ring slot, and it basically equips, they said it's on a chain around your neck, right? But you get a 3rd ring slot, so you get to have 3 fingers, and then the follow-up to that is 25% increased bonuses from your rings and amulets, so that'll apply to all 3 rings and your amulet, effectively giving you 2 extra pieces of gear. You're getting an extra piece of gear from Unfurled Finger, and then your 25% increased bonuses from 4 pieces of gear is effectively a 5th piece of gear. So this is a pretty insane ascendancy that you could, technically do anything with. You're getting to wear like 12 pieces of gear on this character. And the fact that the rest of the tree is really not that interesting or great kind of makes sense given how strong this bottom branch is. Now, what I don't know and what nobody knows right now is how hard Ingenuity is going to get nerfed in the patch and whether Ingenuity will work with the extra ring that you're wearing around your neck or not. If it's not nerfed that hard, and if it does work with that, then this is probably going to be the greatest Ascendancy in the game, just based on the fact that you're going to get to wear the equivalent of like 6 or 7 pieces of, or I guess like 4 extra pieces of gear over any other Ascendancy, which is just completely crazy. Rings are very strong. But you know, you never know, right? It could wind up being that Ingenuity doesn't work with it, or Ingenuity just gets super hard nerfed, and then that would kind of spoil things a little bit. I did look around at some unique rings. I didn't see anything that really jumped out at me as being super awesome, other than just like being able to add in a really nicely rolled Ventress Gamble is pretty cool. So there you go. Alright, so the next thing I wanted to focus on is the 3 other Ascendancies that are being added. There's one for Warrior, one for Mercenary, and one for Witch. And I want to start with the Warrior one because this was one that I saw people just immediately start dunking on and saying was terrible. And I actually think it might wind up being better than people think, but I think it's very defensive. So there are 3 little 1-point or 2-point branches here that kind of give you like a weapon damage buff out of Temper Weapon against the Anvil, or like Animate Weapon from PoE 1 out of Living Weapon. Neither of those seem that great. They could be, but they don't seem that great thematically. And then Heat of the Forge is very much like a Mjolnir effect, but for a fire spell. I think unless you're building into some sort of spell mage, I don't really think that would be that great either. But Coal Stoker and Forged in the Flame are straight from the Chieftain in PoE 1, where you're getting you can just stack fire res, and that'll give you all 3 of your LE reses. And then Forged in the Flame, you can just stack max fire res, and that'll give you max of all 3 elemental reses. So I think that's pretty good instant defense for this Ascendancy. So the other part of this Ascendancy is Smith's Masterwork. You're only able to use a normal body armor, which is weird, right? But this is a free passive, and then you're able to allocate any of these points down below, any that you want to add. So you're not spending any points on travel points in order to get them, so that you can take, potentially if you took Coal Stoker and Forged in the Flame, you could take 4 of these. So I think the combination of early on in gearing, maybe like Tantalum Alloy to get just a ton of fire res to synergize with Forged in Flame, or Coal Stoker really, could be something, but I think ultimately you would probably phase out of that. But Kitavan Engraving, 15% increase max life. Support Straps, 20% increase strength. Flowing Metal, 5 max fire res, especially in conjunction with Forged in Flame. That's pretty huge. And then Molten Symbol, 25% of fizz taken as fire, is amazing. There's some other stuff in here that's good, though. Dedication to Kitava, armor applying to chaos damage taken from hits is pretty strong. Leather Bindings, 5% of life per second, is also just a lot of life regen. So this is a very weird Ascendancy. I don't think it's going to be popular or great, but there's maybe something there. It could wind up being really good in like hardcore solo self-found or something, being able to have all of these bonuses. But I just don't know. I don't really see anything offensively valuable here, so if maces wind up becoming really good, this could be good. Otherwise, it's going to kind of be hard to figure out. The next Ascendancy is the Lich, and this is being added for the Witch. And there is a lot going on with this one. There's Crystalline Phylactery. This is a bit of a weird one. You just get an extra socket on the tree, and then it gives you double effect of that jewel. Very weird. I don't know how good that really is. But then over on the right-hand side, there's like this little bonus. You get increased energy shield if you used a power charge recently. I don't think that's anything. Price of power, non-channeling spells consume power charges to deal 25% more damage. If you have some way hooked up of generating a lot of power charges, this could be a pretty big damage increase, especially if you combine it with Eldritch Empowerment for 30% more damage for your non-channeling spells at the cost of a bit of max energy shield. Like, that's a lot of different damage modifiers, 25 and 30%. There's quite a bit of restrictions there. You really have to go around a lot, but could be really good. Soulless Form and Eternal Life are very interesting as a 2-point combo, or 4-point combo, I suppose. Getting no mana regen at all, but then regenning mana equal to 6% of your max life per second. If you have like 2,500 max life, that winds up being quite a lot. Like 2,500 times 0.06 is about 150 mana regen per second. That's a lot of mana regen, so you know, if you're doing like a normal life setup, that could be pretty good. And then this also makes it so that your life just simply cannot be changed while you have energy shield, which is weird, right? It completely overcompensates or overcomes that soulless form component downside, basically 10% of damage taken by passing energy shield, which I think means that that damage would just simply go away. I think it just wouldn't be able to do anything, which is pretty good. 10% damage reduction, pretty good. However, taking either of these, or really any of these 4 points I've talked about so far as your first or second set of Ascendancy nodes while leveling is bad, right? These are all very weird. So I see this as a very, very difficult tree to start, at least on this side of the tree. Now over on the left-hand side, I think there might be a bit of a mistake here. I think that the end of these two branches, Dominion over Flesh and Blackened Heart, should probably be swapped with each other, and that would make Rupture the Soul and Dominion over Flesh basically just be a cultist from PoE 1. You know, you kill enemies that are cursed, and then they'll explode. Cool, although it is a lot harder to curse enemies in this game, so that's actually quite a lot harder to use, and it's a lower chance to explode than from PoE 1, so it's not as good. But you're able to affect like hexproof enemies with curses and get multiple curses up, so you just blasphemy curses out, and then there you go, right? That works. The other one, the other set of skills, Necromantic Conduit and Blackened Heart, is really interesting. Being able to have permanent Unholy Might on you and all of your minions is a lot, but losing 5% of your mana per second is a ton, especially if you have, let's say you have like 1,000 mana, that's like 50 mana per second. That is quite a bit. And yeah, you know, you basically would have to take Soulless Form and able to regen enough mana to compensate for that. So you would want to take Necromantic Conduit, and then probably Blackened Heart, you know, would probably be the one down at the bottom of that line there. So you would have a lot of mana, have a lot of increased damage from Unholy Might. Cool. Then you'd also have a lot of mana regen out of Soulless Form, and then potentially damage reduction out of it with the combination of Eternal Life. That's an idea, but it takes a lot of stat stacking to really make any of this stuff work. And unfortunately, there's just no way to swap Ascendancies still in the game, so I don't think that this Ascendancy is going to be good on a budget. And I don't really even know that it's going to be that great on a high budget, but it could wind up being. I'm not Mr. Minion, but I do think there's potential. All right, the final Ascendancy I want to touch on is the Tactician for the Mercenary. And this one is very minion oriented, and there's a lot of interesting stuff here. If you wanted to make like a skeletal sniper mercenary, I think this is the Ascendancy to do it with. You get some really good bonuses here. 50% less reservation on persistent buffs is amazing. If you're doing a sort of supportive buff type of character, adding a lot of attack damage to enemies based off of your main hand's weapon damage is also potentially something, although that is a little weird because, you know, probably want to just run like stuff that gives as much max minion level as possible. So I don't know that that's really going to line up, but maybe. Maybe there's something there to run like a super heavy hitting weapon and then also combine that with minions. Maybe there's potential. There's also this Unleash Hell skill that they used in the unveiling where they showed just like a big rain of arrows. I didn't really love it, but maybe it's good. You never know. But then a lot of the other stuff is very support oriented in a way that doesn't really do any damage or really like have a lot of appeal to me. Suppressing fire, you know, you pin enemies with all of your projectile damage, and then you spend another pair of Ascendancy points to make pinned enemies be effectively frozen, right? This is just a different version of frozen. That's a lot of points spent into freezing enemies when you could just hit them with cold damage and freeze them that way, right? So I don't really love that. And then polish that gear and stay light, use cover is a lot of points spent into getting a decent amount of evasion and physical damage reduction. Yeah, really just not that amazing, ultimately. Then finally, there's some totem stuff down here at the bottom. Nothing I'm really all that interested in. So I think this is probably the big dud of the 3 Ascendancy nodes to me. But, you know, I think if you were going to make minions work, if you're going to do a minion build as a mercenary rather than doing it as like an Infernalist or a Lich, maybe this would be an approach you could take instead of a Gemling Legionnaire. Although, depending on whether Gemling Legionnaire really gets nerfed all that hard, it might wind up still being better than this. All right, now I want to talk about some uniques that they unveiled. So there were a couple of really interesting uniques here. I liked both of these actually, Chernobog's Pillar. So this one obviously was like seen as one of the weaker uniques. I think, you know, as soon as people saw it, they were saying spamming 1x in the chat. I don't think it's necessarily a 1x unique. For one, it's level 65, so I think this is probably going to be kind of a less common drop. It has a decent amount of resistances on it, but mainly that 1% of damage is fire damage per 1% chance to block. If you're able to get a lot of block chance through other means, you know, through the tree, essentially, I think this could wind up being a pretty substantial increase to your damage output, you know, by adding in as extra fire damage. If maces wind up being good, the potential for like a sword and board build using this shield, maybe there is something there that it certainly would add a lot of fire damage, and that would synergize with the mace playstyle. However, the fact that it doesn't have built-in increased block chance is a bit of a downside, so I would like to see that changed. I don't know that that's going to happen before the patch, but if it does, I think that could send this rocketing up. Also, I think the artwork is pretty dope. Then the bigger one, the kind of unique here, is the Coming Calamity. This one is incredibly strong, even with them nerfing heralds. I think this is still insane because it grants all 3 of the heralds, and they have no reservation associated with them at all. So you can run this, you get a good amount of life and a lot of all res, and then also completely zero out enemy resistances, so you don't even have to invest into exposure or penetration or anything at all. You have amazing built-in clear out of all 3 of the heralds. You know, I think this is absolutely going to wind up being a chase unique for a large variety of attack-based builds because it has pretty much everything you want, and it does a lot to fix life, resistances, clear, and, I mean, both single target and clear damage, which is pretty great. It does have a non-trivial level, you know, level 84 and then 86 strength and dex, so I think this is going to wind up being, like, a very high-level chase unique, but we'll see. And then one other unique I really wanted to take a look at is something that they actually showed off before the big reveal here, the Deepest Tower. This is something that they teased out a couple of weeks ago, and as you can see, it has like some life and armor and ES and chaos res, but then that final line, enemies in your presence count on being as being on low life, is insane. This is such a powerful node, and I'm going to show off why. Because of a lot of small passives in the tree, all of these small passives that grant 30% increased damage with hits against enemies that are on low life, which could be nerfed, right? This may not be in the game by the time the patch rolls around, but if you take all of these small passives, and then Finality, which grants another 120%, and Finishing Blows, which grants another 60. All of these add up to 420% increased damage with hits against enemies that are on low life, and if everything is on low life, that's just 420% increased damage, which is pretty huge. This also synergizes really well with Stars Aligned, which gives you lucky damage with your hits on enemies that are on low life, and unlike Lightning Rod, which only counts for lightning damage with non-critical hits, this doesn't apply to this doesn't require the non-critical component. It applies to all damage, so you can build for crit and really get a lot of damage out of this. So I think that helm on an Amazon that's running an accuracy build, getting a lot of physical damage out of an accuracy build, and then also getting a bunch of damage out of this is something that's like very appealing. It might wind up being very expensive to put together, especially if people are all also gunning for that. There are some other things you can synergize with this as well. Heft will give you 30% more max physical damage. That's huge with getting that second reroll on the damage roll out of it being lucky. And then Execute just gives you 40% more damage with hits on enemies that are on low life. So obviously that's a pretty big damage modifier as well. So absolutely crazy unique. You know, this might wind up being insanely expensive, but it is level 45. Obviously, it has strength in it requirements, but they're pretty low, 46 each. So this might wind up not even being that insanely rare. Although you never know, it might wind up being like Headhunter Mage Blood levels of rarity. I guess we'll find out. All right, that's it. The new patch looks fantastic. I have seen some people complaining about other people complaining about the patch, actually. I've seen second order complainers. I haven't actually seen any first order complainers, and I don't really need to. I already have my Huntress name reserved, Year of the Spear. The in-game looks much better. There's like 100+ support gems to play with, beasts to tame, uniques to build around, and spears to recombinate. There's a lot more to do in PoE 2's endgame than there was in the initial release, so I'm ready to enjoy the new patch. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and you want to see more like it, and if you want to support us even further, consider becoming a channel member. Thanks for watching, and get hyped for patch 0.2.0. Bye.